Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War news update, third part there. I had to split the geopolitical news because there's so much to talk about from the military aid news. I did do that bit of a joke at the end of my first video today saying, I'm going to take a break from doing videos, and so big channel announcement, and then said, it's only going to be 10 minutes for a cup of tea. The truth of the matter is, I haven't even had a cup of tea yet. I haven't actually stood up from this seat. That's how sad I am. I'm just a very sad man. Anyway, here we are going to start with the geopolitical video with Zelensky discussing new ways of strengthening Ukraine's defences with Macron and with France. Now, this is exactly what I was predicting would happen, because Macron came out very strongly by convening that meeting and saying, we're not going to stop, buying shells outside of the EU. We are going to do whatever it takes, for Ukraine to win. We're talking about not having troops in Ukraine off the table in discussions, that kind of thing. So very strong rhetoric and leadership from Macron. And I was thinking, Zelensky's going to go straight to Macron and go, yes, buddy, let's do this together. And you've got the second biggest defense export industry in the world. Let's have some of that. And I think that's what you're going to see. And Macron himself is struggling with, I guess, his own political PR and approval ratings in France. French always hate their leaders anyway. I mean, the French complain about anything. You should watch France play rugby, and as soon as they're down, they're getting booed by their own fans. They don't suffer fools gladly, and they certainly like to protest. We know that, and they like to complain about their leaders. So maybe he's trying to say, Macron, from a personal point of view, and I keep talking about this, I understand what people do from not only what's good and right from a kind of objective political stance, but also for their own personal political world that they exist in, and their own PR, etc., etc. So he's going to be trying to be strong to appeal to his electorate, to say, look, I'm a European leader, I'm right in the middle of it, I'm in the thick of it, and I am doing what's good and right, and I'm doing what's right for our own economy, etc., etc. And hopefully he would think he'll get the votes to go along with that. Right, President Zelensky said that at a press conference in Tirana. So he's been down in the sort of Balkan areas, in Montenegro, North Macedonia. Anyway, he wants to discuss new ways of strengthening Ukraine's defences with French President Macron. The Ukrainian president expects to meet him in mid-March. Macron said he would talk about the new ideas of strengthening Ukraine, and he said that he would share information with me when he would come to Ukraine. So that's huge. So Macron's going to be coming to Ukraine, going to be sharing information. I mean, it's just frustrating that even that takes weeks, and you want to share it now. Let's do now. That's what I think about everything. Although I'm then always trying to understand why things are delayed. So what was I talking about earlier today? Why the Presidential Drawdown Authority was now rather than, say, a month ago or 2 months ago. And it's trying to understand the motivations of people. We can criticize people as well and say that is a terrible decision, but actually, why did you make that decision? President of Ukraine Zelensky met with President of Serbia Alexander Vučić. Now, this is an incredibly important meeting because Vučić is really in the pocket of Putin. He just met recently in China, went out to China to say that, you can do what you like with Taiwan. So his positioning is very much not EU friendly. It's in the sphere of influence of BRICS. It's in the sphere of influence of Putin and Xi Jinping as dictators. And Serbia, the ultra-nationalist movement in Serbia has been fermented by funding and influence from Russia. It's a real hotbed of Russian support at the moment amongst much of the population. But anyway, meeting with Zelensky here, that's an important meeting. I'd love to know what came out of that. Prime Minister of North Macedonia, Talat Xhaferi, and President Zelensky signed a joint declaration of support for the Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. Again, importance, even some of these smaller nations. It's about getting support from everyone. Remember as well, some of these smaller nations you might not think are so important, but when it comes to one-for-one votes in the UN, they're incredibly important. As well as, it's just good and right to speak to everyone, and everyone is important in their own way. Right. Anne Applebaum. So we're going to move on to sort of talking about US politics. I know this is often divisive, but it is what it is. I don't think, says Anne Applebaum. Oh, someone told me. So I've been saying Anne Applebaum is a great author and journalist. I like her book Twilight of Democracy is brilliant. And I keep saying that she's married to a Polish chap. It turns out someone's telling me it's the Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski that she's married to. Bloody hell, that all makes so much sense now. Anyway, so she's right in the thick of it. I don't think there's even a contest. Not since the days of Lord Haw and Tokyo Rose has there been a more dedicated propagandist than Tucker Carlson, who promotes one of the world's ugliest, bloodiest, most anti-American dictatorships. Okay, so that's where we're going to go with this. Right. Now, Mike Johnson, Speaker Mike Johnson, I did a video on this yesterday. If you're the Speaker of the House of Representatives and you're sent a letter from 23 dignitaries from around the world telling you, mate, you really need to do this, this is really important, self-awareness should surely lead you to believe that, yeah, maybe if I don't do this, I might not be doing the right thing. But this is what happens. Again, it's like motivation. Why do people do things? We know that if he's going to table the bill for Ukraine aid, then he'll have his seat vacated. Lots of people have been asking, why don't some Republicans vacate a seat anyway to get someone in who's going to make decisions that are on behalf of the US, more beneficially on behalf of the US and international diplomacy? And actually, there were some rumors going around yesterday that there were some Republicans that were going to move to vacate his seat in that vein, but they were worried about the government shutdown. And if you remove Speaker Johnson from the seat, and they've got to work out the government shutdown thing, which is this ongoing funding for the government, then it would have caused chaos. But I believe that the government shutdown has been averted and the deal's been put in place. So I don't know whether you might start seeing a movement to get Speaker Johnson out of Dodge. Like the international community are giving pressure. Now we're going to get to this idea of because I still have this with a lot on my threads, for a lot of pro-Republican, pro-Trumpian Republicans, which is, it is all the Democrats' fault. It's not the GOP's fault, and it's because they haven't done a deal on the border, right? So I'm going to say a lot of what I have said and a few other bits here, but I've given you my analogies of why I think that's a false equivalence, or it's a false move, sorry. And, I've talked about the leverage kind of thing, the false leverage is like they're choosing Ukraine, nothing else. But also the Democrats did do what the Republicans asked. They said, we want a deal on the border. And so they sent Republicans in with Democrats to give the most officious deal that's ever been given on behalf of the Democrats. They would never pass this if Democrats had full majority in all the houses. And this would be really unlikely to get a bill like this passed again. And the Republicans got that out of the Democrats. And then the Johnson wing, the MAGA wing, said, yeah, okay, no, I know we said that we wanted that. Now you're giving it to us. Actually, we want this, and we're going to move the goalposts. And we just basically want you to build up a wall at the border, and that's it. We want you to close the border. And so now you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene coming out and saying, where are you? Stop pandering to Democrats, hold the line, Mike Johnson, and shut down the government. She's saying she doesn't want to govern. She doesn't want the Republicans to govern. She wants the government to shut down. She wants no more CRs. Do you agree? No more money for Ukraine, Mike Johnson. So what's the first thing she says after that? I'm going to, 1, shut the government down. 2, no more money for Ukraine. She doesn't say, I want to give money to Ukraine, but I want the border to be done first. She says, no more money to Ukraine. This is where the sympathies of Marjorie Taylor Greene lie. Like, she is a lapdog of Putin, of a dictator, and she'll happily lick his sticky hands. That is who Marjorie Taylor Greene is, right? Put America first every single time, and put helping other nations in our own best interests way down the list. So it's I think it's pretty despicable. So. Yeah, so going back to what I was talking about, that you have this situation whereby doesn't matter what the Democrats do, the Republicans will not give these Republicans, only these ones over here, this small group of Republicans, will not give permission for aid to go to Ukraine. They will not vote that bill through. They won't table it. And so therefore, you're not interested about governing. You're not interested about finding a solution. You're interested in screwing things over until November, until you can get Trump in. So when we talk about whose fault this is, oh, the Democrats could just do this. It's like the Democrats didn't make this a partisan issue. It's only the Republicans and only certain Republicans that have made Ukraine aid a partisan issue. Imagine that had been the case back in the Cold War times. It's just absolutely insane. But it's only the GOP that has made this issue partisan. And because they've made it partisan, then it allows other people, some of you guys out there, to say this is the Democrats' fault. The Democrats didn't make this a partisan issue. This was just a world global issue that needs everyone to unite behind what is good and right and proper. That's no longer happening because of those Republicans driving a wedge and falsely attaching an issue of contingency to Ukraine aid and saying the border, Ukraine aid is only contingent on a border, but then admitting that actually even then it's not, because you know what? No more money to Ukraine. So don't blame the Democrats when you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene running around very openly saying no more money to Ukraine. Now, Yulia Navalnaya, so Alexei Navalny's wife, has come out and said, you're dealing not with a politician, but with a blooded mafiosi. Putin is the head of an organized criminal group. Well, in fact, let's listen to her because it's not too long.
Saturday was 2 years since Putin started a full-scale war against Ukraine. A brutal and sneaky war. The whole world rushed to Ukraine's aid, but 2 years passed. There is much exhaustion, much blood, much disappointment, and Putin has gone nowhere. Everything has already been used. Weapons, money, sanctions, nothing is working. And the worst has happened. Everyone got used to the war. Here and there people start to say, well, we'll have to come to an agreement with Putin anyway. And then Putin killed my husband, Alexei Navalny. On his orders, Alexei was tortured. Saturday was 2 years.
Yeah. Political innovation is that the methods that need to be used are ones used to fight organised crime, not political competition, not diplomatic notes, but investigation of intricate financial schemes, not expressing concern, but searching for mafia accomplices in your countries, invisible lawyers and financial experts who help Putin and his friends hide money, she said. So there's this war going on with Russia on the battlefields, but there's this war going on with Russia in the corridors of power, in the financial institutions, and in our information spaces. This is all the stuff I talk about all the time. And why does Tucker Carlson come out and say what he does? Why does Marjorie Taylor Greene come out and say what she does? Like, the influence on these people from these nefarious quarters is incredibly worrying. Russia is, if it's not winning the information war with us, if it's not an outright victory, then their return on investment has been insanely good. And they are getting people to make decisions and say things and do things that would have made your hair fall out 40 years ago under, say, Reagan or something. Navalny's widow says sanctions don't work on Putin. More innovative ways are needed. Absolutely. So yeah, and then I was going to talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's just this is apropos to nothing, but Tommy Tuberville was the guy who has recently stopped the appointment of something like 300 to 400 high-ranking military personnel right through the American military, and he was doing that because of stuff to do with culture wars and abortion and whatever. Anyway, he came out and said, hope Joe Biden enjoyed going out for an ice cream in New York City while the rest of the city is afraid of crime and migrants. And this is where community notes are good. I do like community notes, and I like it when readers just fact check. It's like, New York's homicide rate is 4.8 per 100,000. Alabama, the state Tuberville represents, has a homicide rate of 15.9, the third highest in the nation, which is, interestingly, over 3 times as high as New York. Florida, the state where Tuberville actually resides, also has a significantly higher homicide rate of 7.4 per 100,000 than New York. I just love that. Tuberville, jog on, mate, you absolute numpty. His answer to being pressed on the IVF thing the other day was stuff of genius. We need to do things so people can have more children. Yeah, no, but you've literally just said that we should stop IVF happening. Yeah, we'll have that discussion another day. Oh, yeah, you muppet. Anyway, sorry, moving on. So, US Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell, this is really big news, has been the longest reigning Senate leader in history, will step down from his position in November. Now, I'm no fan of Mitch McConnell. I've written articles against him for many years. However, from a Ukrainian point of view, this is a worry because he is a staunch supporter of Ukraine. He's been compromised by all the machinations going on in the Republican Party and the takeover of the Trump wing. But essentially, he knows foreign diplomacy better than many. And it'll be interesting to see who takes his place as Ukraine battle map. Will it be someone who's pro-Trump and anti-Ukraine like in the House? Almost certainly. And this is a worry going forward. So, Kyiv Independent said McConnell's exit signals a shift in Republican support for Ukraine. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's impending departure from the leadership role in November signals a significant shift. And I think that is actually quite worrying because Trumpism is growing in the GOP. And it is a challenge. We'll see if he fails to get elected in November 2024. That might do something about that. Now, this is so important. Please, now bear with me on this one. And again, if you're a massive fan of Trump, hear me out. Trump will meet with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban next week. Who's he not meeting with? All the leaders of the Western world that should be on side of the US, Western leaders that are part of NATO, all over the world. People who are big fans of working together with the US to make the world a better place. Who does he meet with? Viktor Orban, who is moving quite openly towards greater illiberalism in his failing democracy. As the publication notes, Bloomberg, Trump is increasingly exerting his influence on foreign policy during the election campaign. Right, now I talk about how much he loves Orban, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. I'm going to refer you to Malcolm Turnbull. So Malcolm Turnbull is a former Prime Minister of Australia who is a conservative Prime Minister, right? This is someone who should be aligned with Republican politics. He's as a liberal party, that's liberal classic liberalism, not liberal as in moral liberalism. This is classic liberalism. So the Liberal Party in Australia is your Conservative Party. Now, just to give you an idea of who Malcolm Turnbull is.
Very, very strong foreign minister in Julie Bishop.
Sorry.
And he's
ended up, yes, but I hate you.
That's Malcolm Turnbull. In fact, I had that slightly in the wrong place. So he famously had a massive argument with Trump on the phone due to a deal that Obama had done with Australia to do with refugees and whatnot. And Trump came in and then said, no, we ain't doing that. And then Malcolm Turnbull phoned up and said, actually, you need to do that. And they had this really big argument.
Anyway, it turned out to be a good call. It essentially, the summary was, it started off, no way, Jose, and ended up, yes, but I hate you. So I got the right outcome, but it was pretty tough call.
I think Turnbull's achievements on the global stage have never been sufficiently appreciated. It wasn't Tony's natural habitat.
Tony Abbott, the
was
previous
Malcolm's natural
ruler.
habitat. And he had a very, very strong foreign minister in Julie Bishop. Malcolm, he was urbane, he was persuasive, he was charming. And he's one of the most impressive global leaders in the world and was acknowledged as such by his contemporaries.
We live in our own bubbles, on our own nations, and we don't realise that stuff is going on in international meetings all the time. And there are dignitaries from different countries, and we don't realise that how good someone is, and because they're good for their country. But actually, Malcolm Turnbull was quite well respected in being an international representative of Australia and doing some good things.
One of the reasons is that he was one of the only world leaders who could deal with Donald Trump.
So he stood up to Donald Trump, and that phone call was an example of that. Now, what we're going to listen to now is Turnbull, and this has all gone viral recently, but I'm going to show you from the original Q&A show, things he said about Trump from his actual observations of Trump, one-to-one, right? Someone that knows Trump, that has dealt with Trump, and has seen Trump speak with Putin, Xi Jinping, and others.
Without the support of the West, they will struggle to defend themselves. Regrettably, the Republican Party under Donald Trump, and particularly the right wing of the Republican Party, are very sympathetic to Vladimir Putin. I mean, I've been with Trump and Putin. Trump is in awe of Putin. He's, when you see Trump with Putin, as I have on a few occasions, he's like the 12-year-old boy that goes to high school and meets the captain of the football team. My hero. It is really creepy. It's really creepy. Now,
and that struck you at the time?
Oh, absolutely. It struck everybody. It was like you could touch it. It was creepy. The creepiness was palpable.
Are you trying to say they're having a bromance?
No, I'm not saying. I'm just telling you what I saw, and you saw that in that press conference they did in I think in Helsinki.
Yeah.
You saw a similar thing. Now the sad thing is that you've got the right wing of the Republican Party. You saw this with Tucker Carlson doing that sycophantic kind of non-interview with Putin, Vladimir Putin. I mean, it is
a half-an-hour history lesson.
It is terrifying, and there is the scary thing is that for countries like Australia and many European countries, we may find ourselves. Are we going to find ourselves not dealing just with two autocracies in Russia and China? But what is Trump's America going to look like? This is a guy leading a party that is no longer committed to democracy as we understand it.
And that is how the rest of the world sees America at the moment. So you might be the biggest Trump supporter and hate the fact that I'm saying this, but here's a leader that A, knows Trump, B, has seen him with other dictators, and C, is saying that we're worried, right? The rest of the world is worried. And then when Trump says, I'm going to pull out of NATO, and says all these sorts of things, or you can but worry. This is a challenge going forward. Anyway, he said a lot more, but the idea that all the leaders saw that, and I've told you before, I think I've written articles on how much Trump loves Kim Jong-un, Viktor Orban, Jair Bolsonaro, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping. And so when the reason why this is freaking important is because the first international guy he's going out to meet on his campaign trail is Viktor Orban. So don't come back at me that Trump is all wonderful and all this and he's going to solve all these problems. He is making all the moves to move closer to move the US closer to an authoritarian state. And when you look at Project 2025, which is his plan, or the plan's been made for him by others, it is insanely scary. Right, and this is what Malcolm Turnbull says elsewhere in that same show.
Trump is a bully. He encourages people to suck up to him. You know, notoriously, I didn't do that. I mean, that was partly my personality and partly circumstance, but I think it was a good thing. But, you know, we have to get used to the fact that the United States may not be aligned on the same values in quite the same way as it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. And that's a reality we've got to live with.
Scott Morrison did an exit interview with the Nine paper.
So he's saying, look, we've got to accept that the US, if Trump gets in, and he talks elsewhere about that being 50-50, it's in the balance, but if he gets in, then we've got to deal with the world being a very different place and the US being a very different place. And we need to do that. She goes on to talk about Scott Morrison, who was the Liberal Party and Liberal Party leader and previous Prime Minister before the President Albanese, so it's gone back to Labour. Anyway, she's talking about that's who Scott Morrison is.
And he said, Donald Trump poses no threat to Australia's national security.
Oh, sure. So he thinks, what if Donald Trump...
And Scott Morrison was a real big fan. He was very much a Trumpian leader in Australia, and this is why I was particularly happy that Albanese beat him recently.
Trump forces Ukraine to surrender to Putin. What if Donald Trump pulls out of NATO?
And you think these are live options, like possibilities?
I think Donald Trump has threatened to pull out of NATO. Donald Trump stood up in front of an audience and said to an unnamed European leader, if you don't spend more money on defence, I'm going to encourage, Putin to have a go at you. That's more or less what he said. I mean, look, Trump rattled every single cage, every single alliance. He is attracted to dictators and tyrants like Kim Jong-un, like Xi Jinping, like Putin, and he threatened to undermine or pull out of of America's longest standing alliances. Now, if Scott Morrison thinks none of that is a threat to Australian security, well, I'm afraid to say, not for the first time, I disagree with my distinguished successor.
Not for the first time.
And then he says later here,
certainly even money at this stage.
that's Trump getting voted in.
He's not a warmonger. Okay?
This is interesting.
He's essentially at heart an isolationist. And Peter's absolutely right that the Europeans have not spent enough on their own defence, and they have got, if you like, complacent under the American security umbrella. But the fact remains is that the way Trump operates is he encourages our adversaries. He is not, who is the leader that he most admires in Europe? It's Viktor Orban.
Who's he visiting?
Not exactly a model for liberal democracy. In fact, he prides himself on running an illiberal democracy in Hungary.
And was holding off on support for Ukraine as well.
Yeah, exactly. Again, you've got to be careful not to get in Trump derangement syndrome, where everything Trump says is there because he says it is therefore wrong. But nonetheless, the idea that it would be a safer world for any of us, let alone Australia, with Donald Trump at the helm in the White House, is very, very naive.
Georgie?
I couldn't have put that better myself. I mean, not Scott Morrison, Malcolm Turnbull here absolutely nails it. And he confirms everything I've been saying about Trump for actually many, many years. And I just think this was a really important set of quotes from him that I think is well worth looking at. So we did. And that is, these kind of ideas, what's going on going forward with Mike Johnson and Trump getting in possibly. Ukraine's long-term security depends on flipping red states to blue. It's the most important thing we can do as Americans to ensure Putin is defeated. Please help Ukraine by flipping the House and supporting those candidates. So actually, some people are now saying the most important thing going forward is to make sure that the Democrats have a majority in both houses so that they can pass through things like if they had a majority in both houses, there would be aid to Ukraine and it would be freely flowing. And I agree with that. Right, moving on to something else, because I know this is going to annoy people spending too much time on US politics. So the Polish farmers work at the Russian embassy. This is, again, I did show you this yesterday, but the Polish TV channel TV24 has discovered the infiltration of Russians in the farmers' protests. Behind every conflict, there's always Russia. The sooner Russia is defeated, the sooner we'll have better coexistence. And it's these supposed Polish farmers actually being, pro-Russian or actually Russian agents. Poland may temporarily close the border with Ukraine. So, quote, "We are discussing," said Donald Tusk, "with the Ukrainian side, the temporary closure of the border and the cessation of the exchange of goods. Tomorrow, I will also discuss this with Polish farmers." Now, the German finance minister... on top of that, though, Ukrainian officials come back and said the border closure was not discussed with Poland. Taras Kachka, Ukraine's deputy economy minister, who takes part in talks with Poland on a border blockade and trade dispute, said on yesterday that the borders closure was not mentioned during the talks. Kachka was reacting to an earlier statement by Tusk, cited by Polish media, that Warsaw leads talks with Kiev on the possibility of temporarily closing it. Quote, "During all 4 hours of negotiations, the option of closing the border was not mentioned." So I don't know what's going on here. According to Kachka, the negotiating teams were able to find a common language and are working on a constructive solution to unblock the border while taking into account the interests of Polish and Ukrainian farmers. It's not easy, but it is possible. I mean, this is a real challenge going forward, isn't it? German Finance Minister Christian Lindner favours using the interest accrued from frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. I mean, I was assuming this was already happening, but apparently not. The European Union is working on how the proceeds from Russian assets can be used for Ukraine. That is a realistic step that is legally secure and which can be implemented quickly, and that is what we are concentrating on. I mean, it needs to be expedited, that for sure. Turkey offers again to host Russia-Ukraine peace talks. Turkey is ready to do that, according to Erdogan, the Turkish president, in a video address to the Ukraine Southeast Europe Summit. And finally, just in possibly tangentially related international news, Chad, there was a gunfire going off there yesterday. It could be the next, unfortunately, the next African nation to fall foul of a coup that I don't know, but just to give you a warning, where we think about this war as being a world war involved solely in like Ukraine or taking place solely in Ukraine, but also maybe in the information spaces. This is a war with Russia, where Russia is gaining presence and influence right across Africa, for example, and they're trying to get that influence across South America and Latin America as well. And this is, as I said, a war they seem to be having the upper hand with, and the US and Europe have taken their eyes off the game, really, and that will be to the detriment of the West and to the benefit of Russia. Now, part of where else that they are carrying out this war is in Transnistria, which is that eastern annexed area of Moldova. So Transnistria has addressed Russia, asking for help due to economic blockade from Moldova. Declaration was adopted by the Congress of Deputies, according to the Russian RIA Novosti. According to an alleged text of the declaration published by a Telegram channel, the deputies in Transnistria have been asking Russia to carry out a complex of events to defend Transnistria in the conditions of Moldova, intensifying its pressure, taking into account the fact that over 220,000 Russian citizens have permanent residency in the Transnistrian Moldovan Republic, which isn't a thing. That's not a thing, the Transnistrian Moldovan Republic. But, they just make it so, like they've done in South Ossetia. There's a couple of places in Georgia, and then, Crimea, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk. It's what they do. They just steal areas. And the unique positive experience of the Russian peacekeeping on the Dniester and its status as guarantor and mediator in the negotiations progress. The declaration reportedly also approves addresses to the UN and various EU institutions, as well as CIS members, asking them to influence Moldova. In other words, Transnistria is asking Russia to get involved on behalf of Transnistria to make it Russian, really. Russian media, Moscow is to consider Transnistria's protection appeal. Paul Mason, who's a UK journalist, said, "I've reported from Transnistria. It's not defensible by the Russian forces stationed there. The whole West needs to stand behind Moldova's legitimate government if Putin's proxies attempt an overthrow." So Putin is deploying a pre-invasion playbook in another European country, this time Transnistria, and Moscow-backed breakaway in eastern Moldova. So just to let you know, there's certain things I can't say. What can I say that I know from contacts is that Ukraine are taking this seriously. It's probably the most I can say. They are taking this very seriously. Radu Hosu's a Romanian, obviously connected, Moldova, Romania. We should pay as much attention as possible to Transnistria. Before the meeting of the so-called Council of Deputies from the breakaway region of Transnistria, many people assumed that nothing would happen, as the meeting had no chance of success for several reasons. From the economic reason, Transnistria is dependent on the Republic of Moldova, to the energy reason and the dependence of the Republic of Moldova and or Ukraine for the survival of the population of the breakaway region, I come to contradict these views. The signal given today is a clear one for me, and if the Russian modus operandi is going to work as it has done so far, we are at the point of the resumption of direct Russian intrusion into the internal politics of the Republic of Moldova. What do I mean by that? If the Russian modus operandi will be implemented, then we will see Transnistria that will be swallowed by Russia, even if not tomorrow, in the next period for sure. This is my opinion, the most serious threat to the Republic of Moldova. I do not think I'm panicking when I say that Russia, through Vladimir Putin, will accept tomorrow that Russia will engage in protecting the Russian population in Transnistria, even if perhaps he will not say it firmly, and in these words, he will only prepare the Russian population as well, but also for the trivialization of the topic of protection of Russians everywhere. So actually, I don't think Putin's just done a 2.5-hour talk to, kind of State of the Union address, if you like. He didn't mention Transnistria. I don't think he mentioned it explicitly. However, it's about putting all the bricks in place to build towards something. When or if annexation happens, the event will involve Romania if we want to protect democracy in Moldova. What will Romania's involvement mean? We don't know yet, but I think it's important to keep an eye on the situation in Transnistria because it will directly affect all of us. As I've said many times, Russia will not let up until it creates crises and problems around the war in Ukraine. Unfortunately, the moment when the collective West could have stopped these situations long ago passed when they faltered with helping Ukraine in a firm and decisive way. It will prove once again that all those who were then accused of you just want war, you just want to involve us in other people's wars, will be in for a nasty surprise. Russia is taking advantage of the bowed head, not forgiving it. It cuts it off. Keep an eye on Transnistria. Absolutely. Like, as a, I guess, former pacifistic liberal, I was talking the other day about the paradox of tolerance. We can't be so liberal that we get taken advantage of, or we can't be so forgiving or so tolerant of what, in this case, Russia is doing, that we allow Russia to end up doing everything at once as we stand by, and then eventually that consumes us. Eventually we're the last ones to be consumed by that kind of growing authoritarian imperialism. And you can include China and Iran and North Korea in that. This is genuinely a worry. Maya Sandu has hinted that Chisinau, so that's the capital of Moldova, will not back down after Tiraspol's decision to ask Russia for help. Quote, Moldova is committed to a peaceful settlement. What the government is currently doing is taking small steps towards the economic reintegration of the country. So she's very much a pro-EU leader that's, having that huge challenge of Russia having an annexed nation within Moldova. And then Anton Gerashchenko finally says, what is behind the appeal of Transnistria deputies to Russia? Opinion of Igor Tishkovich, expert of the Institute of the Future. So after a long break, a Congress of Transnistria and Moldova Republic, TMR, deputies of all levels took place in Transnistria. But given the war in Ukraine, this event attracted the attention of not only Moldovan Republic media, or Russian propagandists. Some of the Ukrainian journalists tried to get comments from me with a known outcome, something of the sort of, will Putin accept Transnistria into the Russian Federation after the request? It was both amusing and sad. The Congress gathering took place and the deputies appealed to the Russian Federation, more precisely not only to Russia, but also to the UN, European Parliament, OSCE, ICC, CIS, Interparliamentary Assembly, and participants of the 5+2 formula, which I remind you includes Ukraine. Now, what all that means is that because they're involving all of these formal entities, it then makes it a quasi-formal. It assumes their position is already formal and established. It's like we, as the TMR, are appealing to the UN, to the OSCE, to the ICC for help from Russia to establish. Hang on. We haven't agreed that you're a thing. Like the Transnistrian Moldova Republic is not a thing. You've asserted it's a thing, and you're using Russian troops to try and bolster that assertion, but it's not a thing. So be warned when they try and get all these official organizations involved to give it a kind of official stamp or feel. They are trying a fast one there. The appeal to Russia especially emphasizes the need to protect more than 200,000 citizens of the Russian Federation living on this territory and claims almost genocide or at least economic blockade on that part of Moldova. The words are loud, but this is not a request to be accepted as a part of Russia. By the way, there is not a single mention of the referendum of 2006 where, quote, citizens were in favor of independence with later joining Russia At the very least, it's funny, but also logical, both on the part of the elites and the so-called TMR and on the part of the Kremlin. Let's try to make sense of it. For the Kremlin, at first glance, the resolution of the issue of a new subject of the Federation had a lot of advantages. Among them could be named slowing down Moldova's European integration process, at least until the fate of TMR is finally understood. Besides, such a decision could become a trigger for the destabilization of Gagauzia, another problematic region in Moldova. Moldova's lack of forces and means for an armed solution of the separatism problem would mean the emergence of a case similar to the Crimean one, where the region is accepted into the Russian Federation and the country from which it is split off cannot solve the problem. It would be a good example before possible negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. The threat made to the ports of Greater Odessa and navigation on the Danube. So again, this is important for where Ukraine are at the moment in terms of the Danube and Black Sea ports and how close it is to Transnistria, etc., etc. The presence of Russian enclave would automatically require greater concentration of forces and means on a part of Ukraine and Romania, Moldova, and most importantly, would raise the cost of sea cargo shipping to the region due to the increased insurance costs. It would broaden the field of negotiations on ending the war in Ukraine. That is, we would no longer be talking about a two-state war, but rather a regional conflict. And finally, it is a great gift to Putin before the elections. On the other hand, there are also risks for the Kremlin. In particular, such a region would have automatically found itself under blockade. None of the neighbouring countries would have thought of letting goods and people into the territory in question. Moldova could well ask Romania and Ukraine for help. The Ukrainian armed forces are quite capable of solving the issue and at the same time gaining access to the largest arsenal in the region in the village of Kobzna. And that's what I was kind of referring to earlier. The Ukrainians are kind of moving. That is nothing less than 20,000 tons of artillery shells of Soviet caliber alone. That would be a good help given the current shell famine in Ukraine. And finally, liquidation of the TMR, or if there was a decision on accession, seizure of the subject of the Federation, will look bad politically before Putin's conditional coronation. So before the March 17th elections, if it all goes tits up for Russia there, then actually it looks bad for Russia. They lose a bunch of forces and military hardware to the Ukrainians if the Ukrainians get militarily involved to help Moldova solve the problem militarily. So for the Transnistrian elites, the idea of joining Russia, despite all the pro-Russian rhetoric, does not look too attractive. Judge for yourself. Until recently, TMR was actively using Russian energy sources and the payment for them, or rather the debt, was growing for Moldova. Gazprom's approach was simple. It's your territory, you pay for it. In case of accession, who do you think the Russian state will ask to pay for utilities? The population of the TMR has, as a rule, been local Russian and either Moldovan or Ukrainian passports. It's been local Russian and either Moldovan or Ukrainian passports. So they seem to live independently, but they have visa-free travel with the EU and Russian passports for travelling to the east and Russian pensions for Soviet pensioners. Significant part. So in other words, if it then goes all wrong for Transnistria, they'll be invalidated from that kind of movement through the EU. They'll be cut off from the EU more formally. A significant part of the infrastructure is financed from Russia, but foreign trade goes through Moldova with access to the EU markets, among others, which is profitable. TMR is the largest smuggling hub of the region, precisely due to the existence of the territory as a grey zone. Any finalisation of the jurisdiction issue means loss of income, primarily for local elites, precisely the ones who voted. And finally, if TMR becomes part of the Russian Federation, the personnel policy will be formed in Moscow. That is, the locals will very soon lose power, influence and money. In a word, the prospect is not pleasant. Okay, just a few more bits on this because it's important for us to understand what's going on here. Moscow, however, decided to escalate the situation, and now we see the document in the form of the request to protect. This format reveals many possibilities and options for the Kremlin's actions. So reference to 200,000 Russian citizens automatically means a threat of possible use of force on the part of Moscow and a certain legitimization of the protection of its citizens option. The threat is always stronger than the action itself, along with the rumours about a possible deal on Ukraine be it closer to the summer. The threat of a geographic expansion is a familiar method for the Kremlin to raise the stakes. Simply put, Moscow is forming a let's talk now, because then there is a possible expansion of the conflict narrative addressed to EU and US politicians. Okay, let's translate some of this as far as I understand it, which is actually the Russians can't really help militarily there because they're really geographically formally cut off from Transnistria. So they'll talk about it in terms of like rhetoric, and say, "Oh, you don't want this to expand," and they'll use that as a threat. But actually, it's a bit of an empty threat. In 2024, presidential elections will be held in Moldova. At these elections, Maya Sandu has chances both to keep her seat and to lose it to a conditional pro-Russian candidate, especially since such sentiments are common in Moldova. Therefore, any reaction of the president carries risk. So, if Russia does something that's not cool, then actually that gives Maya Sandu a greater chance of being re-elected as a pro-European leader. If Sandu starts pressing the Transnistrian issue, opponents from pro-Russian parties will declare the threat of the country's disintegration. Softness and compromises will mean wide participation of the TMR residents in the elections as it was before 2020. That is, several 100,000 votes will be added in favour of a pro-Russian candidate. The threat of destabilisation of Moldova will become a problem, number one, for Romania in the region, which will automatically reduce attention on the Ukrainian issue. Most importantly, the Kremlin gets an opportunity to play out political swings without obligations, ranging from Medvedev's notorious "there's no money but you hold on" towards the separatists from the TMR to the real preparation of annexation of threats to use military force. So there are all these options, and actually Maya Sandu from the Moldovan pro-EU stance has to play this really carefully, because otherwise she then gets a reaction from pro-Russian people in Moldova and TMR who can then vote against her. So how does she play it? How does Russia play it? How do the elites play it? Each have got their own agenda, and each carries with it advantages but also risks. And so there's this is like a 4D chess going on with Transnistria, and it can boil over and affect Ukraine, or at the very least distract people away from Ukraine. Apparently there is no consensus in Putin's entourage, and this is kind of what I'm saying. There is an understanding of the necessity of blackmail and raising the stakes, but the answer to the question what will happen to the TMR lies somewhere in the who the hell knows category. So that's interesting from Igor Tiskovich from the Institute of the Future. Hopefully that's given. Obviously English is not the first language there, so hopefully it all made sense to you. Hopefully that was a useful little section about what's going on in Transnistria and some of the challenges that lay ahead for everyone involved, really. And that's it for today. That's a long one because of the US politics, but also giving that time to Transnistria. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support. Thank you for your amazing support. So many of you are on Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal who are helping the channel to be a sustainable thing. And also there are the links to helping Greg Terry and Zhenya with the work that we're doing all together out in Ukraine. So follow those links to do a good thing there if you have the ability and wherewithal. Anyway, take care. Speak to you soon.